Hello and welcome to Whispers Reddit. We're thrilled to have you join our cozy corner where we dive into the most intriguing, heartwarming, and sometimes mysterious stories from Reddit. Whether you're here to unwind, get inspired, or simply enjoy a good story, you've come to the right place. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a whisper. Grab a comfortable seat, relax, and let's embark on this storytelling journey together. Thank you for being part of our community. Let's get started. When my son revealed his hidden feelings, our once straightforward relationship became irreparably complicated. On a peaceful evening, our quiet neighborhood was illuminated by a lovely orange glow as the sun began to set behind the hills. The radio was humming softly in the background while I was preparing dinner. Eric, my son, had just returned from college and spent the weekend at home. The house had a calm, cozy vibe that comes from familiarity. Eric had grown up so quickly that he was a child who, following me around the house and asking me a lot of questions about life, he seemed to have changed from the young boy I had known to a strong, self-assured, and sometimes unintentionally distant young man as he grew older. I called him from the living room when dinner was ready, and he looked at me as we sat at the table. I noticed that it was different, intense, and caused me to halt at first, but I dismissed it as a figment of my imagination. He missed home, his classes, and his friends, but something I couldn't quite put into words was evoked in me by the way he spoke and the way his eyes stayed on mine longer than usual, as we used to do often before he left for college. We decided to watch a movie together after supper because the soft cushions and low lighting made the living area feel cozier than usual, which was perfect for a peaceful evening. I couldn't remember the last time we spent an evening together in such tranquility, and I saw how he had grown up. As the movie progressed, I noticed that I was staring at him more than I should have because he had changed from the child I had raised to a man. He also moved closer to me on the couch, just as I was beginning to feel uneasy about the things going through my mind. At first, I thought it was nothing serious, but then his hand touched mine and I felt something electricity that I knew I shouldn't feel. I was shocked by the intensity of the moment and quickly withdrew my hand. "What's wrong, Mom?" stated in a low, almost worried voice, unsure of what to say. I stared at him, my heart racing, trying to push the emotion away, hoping he wouldn't notice our tension. I only said, "I'm tired, sweetie," but I knew that something had changed at that very moment, that we couldn't ignore the blurring of the mother-son divide, and even though neither of us had crossed it, there were many unsaid ideas in the air. A movie was playing in the background as we sat in silence, neither of us paying attention. Told him that I had to go to bed early and get up, but as I was leaving, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between us that night. As I lay in bed, my mind was racing, and I knew that I couldn't let this emotion worsen for the sake of both of us. I had to stay away. However, I didn't know how I felt uneasy when I woke up the next morning. I kept thinking about what had happened the night before, so I tried to convince myself that it had all been in my head. Compared to when I was his mother, I loved him deeply, but not in a way that could ever be misunderstood. I told myself that I was acting irrationally, and by the time I got downstairs, Eric was already up and drinking coffee at the kitchen table. He smiled at me as if nothing had happened, or perhaps it had just been a strange moment that only I had witnessed. I decided to ignore it for the time being, and this morning I answered, trying to sound as normal as possible while feinting a grin too. "I was thinking about going on a hike later, Mom," and he said it in a laid-back and casual manner. We hadn't done anything like that together in a long time, so after how I felt last night, I briefly wondered if I should spend more time alone with him, but I told myself that it was okay because it was just a mother and son hanging around. "It sounds nice," I said, and later that afternoon we went to a nearby path that we had visited often when he was smaller for that. The air was clear, the sky was a vivid blue, and everything appeared to be as usual as we walked side by side, talking about nothing special but our shared past experiences, his future goals, and the usual small talk. I started to laugh because I felt more at ease with him and wondered if I had overreacted the night before, but occasionally we stopped talking as we continued on the trail, leaving a lingering silence that felt heavier than it should have. At one point, Eric stopped walking and turned to face me. Arrived at a clearing with a breathtaking view of the valley below. He said, "You've always been there for me, Mom," in a quiet but earnest tone. "I don't know what I'd do without you." His tone was vulnerable, and there was something about the way he said it that surprised me and made my heart hurt. I tried to make it better by smiling. "Well, you won't have to worry about that anytime soon." I laughed. "I'm not going anywhere," but he wasn't amused. Instead, he moved closer and met my gaze, saying, "No, I mean it," went on. "Eric," I whispered in a voice barely audible above a whisper, "you know how much I love you, right?" "Of course," he said, taking another step toward her. "You know how much I love you more than you realize, my love," I said, feeling cold. I wasn't prepared for the weight and significance of the words that hung in the air. There was something in his eyes that made my pulse race again, just like the previous evening. Heartbeat accelerated. This was not the appropriate way for a mother and son to look at each other or communicate. My body felt immobile, despite my head pleading with me to step back and put some distance between us. I said, "I think we should head back," in a trembling voice. "It's getting late." But before I could move away, he reached out and gently touched my hand. Although the touch was innocuous, the way he held on, with his thumb lightly touching my skin, made me feel sick to my stomach. "I've been feeling something that I shouldn't be feeling, but I'm not sure how to describe it, and I think you felt it too." I was in a panic, my heart pounding in my chest, and I pulled my hand away and took a step back. I said to Eric, "Stop," in a shaky voice. "That's not what you mean, you're perplexed." His face was a mix of hurt and confusion as he looked at me. "Mom. I'm not confused, I am aware of my feelings." "No," I said, shaking my head. I struggled to keep my composure as tears filled my eyes, but I couldn't continue because it felt too heavy and dangerous to say out loud. Eric inhaled deeply, obscuring his features with emotion. "I know I can't help how I feel even though I know it's wrong, and I don't believe you can. This wasn't happening before things progressed further, and we crossed a line that we would never be able to go back. I had to put an end to this, and I broke my voice as I said, I'm your mother, and I also adore you but not." "I apologize," he muttered. "I had no intention of. I didn't want to cause you any discomfort." I took a deep breath, trying to suppress the tumultuous mixture of feelings churning within me, but I wasn't sure. I answered quietly, "It's okay," and suggested that we just head home. The weight of what had been said on the trail hung between us, making every moment of silence between Eric and me painfully long. My mind raced as I tried to process what had just happened, but I kept my eyes on the road. His declaration of feelings and the words that came out of his mouth astounded me. Everything I thought was true about our relationship seemed to have been completely turned upside down. When we reached the driveway, Eric whispered that he was going to his room, and he disappeared up the stairs, and I did the same. Nothing could stop him. My body trembled with the emotions I had been holding inside since the trail moment, and I collapsed onto the couch. I was unsure of how to interpret any of it. He was my baby boy, my kid, but he was no longer a boy, and it was becoming frighteningly clear that our relationship had become more complex than either of us had expected. His gaze on me and the way his palm lingered on mine told me otherwise, despite my desire to believe that his feelings were merely a fleeting phase that would pass. It was expected of mothers to care for and support their sons, but I had only ever done that. The strange tension that had developed between us now poisoned everything, and I was at a loss for how to resolve it. I tried to avoid him for the rest of the day by keeping myself busy with household chores and anything else that would divert my attention from my feelings of guilt. Over time, I felt guilty as if I had done something wrong, like maybe I had been too close to him and too loving. By the time evening came, I was emotionally spent, but I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. I didn't want to confront what had happened, Eric, and I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine when it was so clearly not. I had been lying in bed for hours that night when I heard a knock on my door, and my heart fell. I recognized him. "Mom, can I come in?" Eric asked in a quiet, almost hesitant tone. My mind was screaming at me to say no, to put some distance between us, but I hesitated, knowing I couldn't ignore it. Eric entered, looking just as confused and torn as I was for a minute, unsure of what to do with himself. He stood at the edge of the room, then sat down on the edge of the bed after a few seconds, but he stayed at a distance saying, "I'm sorry," in a regretful tone. What I said previously wasn't appropriate, I am not sure what. I whispered softly, "I had to confront this. Come in," despite how uncomfortable it was. Happened to me while I was trying to think of the right words. I nodded slowly, acknowledging that what had happened earlier, Eric, couldn't happen again. I also acknowledged that this was confusing and that we should be cautious because things aren't meant to be this way. "I know," he said in a whisper, his eyes sad, "but Mom, it's really difficult. I've tried to ignore it, but it keeps coming back." I was deeply affected by what he said, and I was overcome with sadness for him and for us both. I never imagined I would find myself in this situation. We were caught in a maze of emotions that neither of us could untangle. I said again, "I'm your mother," in a gentle yet firm voice. "I can only ever be that. You are aware of that, aren't you?" He nodded, even though his eyes were filled with pain as he looked at me. "I know," he said, I don't want to lose you." "You're not going to lose me, but we need to set boundaries, Eric. This is dangerous territory." There was a brief period of silence between us, but the tension from earlier in the day persisted. Things couldn't continue as they were, even though neither of us wanted to acknowledge it fully. I said gently, "Perhaps it would be best if you return to school tomorrow. I think we both need some space to clear our heads." I could see the sadness in Eric's eyes, but he nodded slowly. "Maybe you're right," he muttered. As I watched him pack his belongings the next morning, I wanted to give him a hug and reassure him that everything would be okay, but after everything that had happened, I simply couldn't bring myself to do it. The house felt more empty than it had in years. When he finally left, I sat on the couch and gave GED out the window, trying to process everything. It wasn't any easier, even though I knew that putting some distance between us was the best course of action. A mother and son's relationship should be simple and unadulterated, but ours had deteriorated into something much more complicated that neither of us could handle. I tried to return to my routine as the days went by. I hoped that the distance would be helpful and that it would give us both the time we needed to work through our emotions, but I knew deep down that things would never be the same again. We couldn't undo the change that had occurred between us, and I wasn't sure what lay ahead for us. Am I the for defending a teenage cashier after a rude customer made her cry at the register? This happened yesterday, and I'm still not sure if I overreacted. I was 35 years old, doing my weekly grocery shopping at a local supermarket. It was a busy afternoon, and there was a long line at the checkout. I was patiently waiting when I noticed that the woman in front of me, who was probably in her mid-50s, was getting more and more agitated as the teenage cashier, who couldn't have been older than 17, was scanning her items. The cashier appeared a little flustered, and I could tell she was probably new, making a few mistakes here and there but nothing. When the cashier accidentally scanned an item twice and had to call for a supervisor to void it, the older woman lost it and began berating the poor girl, saying things like, "How hard can it be to do this job? You can't even do basic tasks, you're wasting people's time." She continued to rant, and the more she yelled, the more flustered the cashier became, until she began to cry. I briefly hoped the woman would calm down, but she didn't. The poor cashier was obviously trying her hardest to keep it together, so I intervened. I told her that she didn't have the right to treat someone that way. She was just trying her hardest, and it was a mistake. If you're that unhappy, perhaps you should try working like her for a day and see how easy it is. The woman looked shocked and told me to mind my own business, to which I replied that it's my business when you're making a child cry over something as trivial as groceries. The cashier supervisor had arrived by then and intervened to resolve the matter, and the woman stormed off while still muttering and cursing. The cashier thanked me with tearful eyes, but a few people in line behind me gave me looks that suggested I was at fault. I'm now second-guessing myself, so Reddit AA for reprimanding her. My husband suddenly adopted a Burmese python, which made me anxious and afraid. Years later, our marriage broke down, and we got divorced. Originally posted on May 7, 2015, perhaps this would be more appropriate on our snakes, but this issue is more about my relationship with my husband than it is with the python itself, so I don't think so personally. 6 months ago, our corn snake died suddenly, and both my husband and I were devastated. He was a cute little boy who was still very young. My husband has owned a number of small reptiles in his lifetime, and he told me he was considering getting a milk snake this time instead of a corn or a garter. However, 2 months after our corn snake died, he returned home with a baby Burmese python, which seems to have always been his dream of owning a Burmese, but I'm also mad that he got one without telling me. On the plus side, they're legal where we live, but I had some reservations that have only gotten worse since we got it. I have GAD, and that thing makes me anxious like no other. When I was researching Burmese pythons, I kept reading about them killing pets, kids, and even their owners. Now that I'm worried and haven't slept much for 4 months, my husband's lack of experience with large snakes, and the larger the python gets, the more it shows. Since we have a cat, the other snakes we have, like our corn snake and my husband's old garter snake, are not dangerous, but now I'm always afraid the python will escape and eat her. I've started locking the cat in our bedroom at night, which keeps us awake because she meows and scratches at the door, and I'm always worried about her when she's home alone. To reiterate, this thing is enormous. He's already 6 feet long. I'm home more than my husband bought it without consulting me, so I'm not going to let it go hungry or live in its own waste out of pride. I honestly don't think we'll be able to give this snake the best quality of life, which I think is essential for all pets. He's getting too big for the tank he's in, which is his third since we've gotten him. This means I have to feed it and change its substrates frequently, which I detest doing so much, especially now that he has advanced to eating rabbits and pigs. My husband wants to build him an enclosure, but I don't think we have the space in our house for it. His food is very expensive and depletes our savings, but it's what he needs, so we can't lower the quality because the python doesn't deserve to live in a small space and eat subpar food because my husband wanted one when he was a kid. At the same time, there's a good chance it could eat us out of our house, and I don't want children while we own one. These creatures can live up to 20 years. Of a python for all of these reasons, but particularly for our cat and its quality of life, I believe we should find a new home for it, preferably in a wildlife sanctuary or something similar. I have gently discussed all of this with my husband, the mental distress it causes me, and how concerned I am for our cat, and how unsustainable the snake is. All he has done is tell me to move on, accuse me of not caring about his happiness, and claim that I am prejudiced against animals that aren't adorable and cuddly. None of this is true. Edit up the title. My husband is male. Edit 2 for the snake people. I acknowledge now that our husbandry is probably wrong, proving my point even more. I have also been informed that the snake probably wasn't a baby if it's at this size now, so take that into consideration. Even with the last accusation, I really enjoyed his smaller snakes. How can I talk to my husband about this issue in a constructive way? He already loves this snake, and I believe that's preventing him from seeing reason. Edit up the title. My husband adopted a Burmese python without my consent for a number of reasons, chief among them being that I am afraid it may kill us, that we lack sufficient experience with large reptiles, and that its conditions are too costly. I believe we should find a new home for the python. My husband is offended and believes this indicates that I detest snakes. I would like to find a new home for the python, but I need advice on how to speak with him in a way that will convince him of my viewpoint. When they were worried about the python escaping and killing the cat, future kid said, "I won't let it get out. You need to take new anxiety medication. Never mind that the corn and the garter both escaped from their tanks. Well, what are you going to do? Let it starve just because you don't like it? That's cruel. We have room for the enclosure," he says, adding, "and we'll find money to keep buying it food. I'm ridiculous to not want babies while we have a python." His rebuttal is especially convincing because they know that won't happen to one of my concerns without providing an explanation. Update May 1st 14th, 2015. First of all, I must express my gratitude for the overwhelming support I received, especially from the reptile enthusiasts who happen to be reading this sub. You guys are amazing. Now, I just want to say what everyone wants to hear at the beginning. The snake is gone, and my cat is okay. Here's what happened Thursday night while I was responding to people in my post several. I messaged my husband on Facebook Thursday night and told him about the situation. He was shocked at how bad things were, but apparently he tried to warn my husband that owning small snakes and then jumping to a burn is like thinking owning house cats makes you qualified to own a tiger. According to the advice of others, talking to my husband's friend who owns Burmese pythons is an experienced reptile keeper and could be a huge help. However, my husband didn't listen, being too busy going to reptile show. Guy breeds venomous cobras, and he's kind of a badass, so he only saw the snake once when we got it. He was upset when I told him about the overfeeding, my husband's wish to start it on live food, and the fact that it roams freely and is all by himself. He promised to come over the following Friday and give my husband a serious talk and do everything in his power to help us find a new home for it. I decided that neither my cat nor I could stay in the house like that any longer, so on Friday morning I knew that if I tried to leave while my husband was at work, he would try to persuade me to stay, so I was a little cunning and called him during his lunch break to let him know that I had left until the snake was gone. He was furious but accused me of being so petty as to allow a snake to ruin our marriage. I had nothing constructive to say to him about it, so I told him I would talk to him later. However, my husband's friend was so incensed at what he saw of the snake that when he arrived at the house, he gave my husband the tongue lashing of his life when he got home from work and told him bluntly that now that he realized how terribly inadequate we were as large snake keepers, there was no way he was going to let the snake stay at our house. The yelling had a profound effect on him. When my husband drove over to my mother's house to speak to me, he looked like a kicked puppy and broke down, telling me that he loved me, that he was sorry for the hell he'd put me through, and that it had taken an expert to truly see what was happening and that he realized that the snake could no longer live with us. I am aware that at that point, the sadness he experienced was brought on by the removal of his snake, but it is not yet fully understood, so don't worry, he is not entirely off the hook. It was calming to hear that his friend got in touch with a herpetology society that he frequently works with, and that a member of that society specializes in rehabilitating snakes that careless pet owners obtain and then mistreat on his ranch, so yesterday was. My husband and I have discussed this a lot, and he admitted that his intense desire to realize his childhood dream made him reckless and selfish. He didn't mean to be mean to me, but he just wanted the snake so badly that he would do and say anything to keep it. It still seems like he hasn't learned, which I'm not expecting this early, but it's still a little disappointing. Last night, he talked about getting a ball python and I said, I don't think we should get another snake for a long time. On Sunday, I sat him down and asked him to tell me the truth about how he got the python because it seemed increasingly unlikely that he would walk into a pet store looking for a milk snake and then just find a Burmese. He acknowledged that he had made arrangements to get one with a breeder online while he was telling me he wanted a little snake, which meant he was purposefully lying to me. The breeder is also a state. Since it's illegal to transport Burmese pythons across state lines, he met up with him to obtain it. I'm furious about this, angry about his lies, and angry that he ignored me for months. He acknowledged that he lied because he knew I would say no, which shows such immaturity that it almost disgusts me. I'm angry that he broke the law, angry that he only listened to what I told him when it came from someone else, and apparently he's been having a quarter-life crisis that he hasn't shared with me because he feels I feel sorry for him because he never went to college at the age of 26, but that doesn't justify treating me badly. I moved back home last night with Kitty, but our marriage is in serious danger right now because of my husband's dishonesty and lack of respect for me. I made a commitment to stay with him, and I don't take that lightly. We're going to be getting counseling, which I hope will help him realize that what he did was wrong rather than a hasty reaction to being in trouble. And we fortify ourselves. If not, I'll have to think about my options. P.S. The other post claimed that we were feeding the snake guinea pigs and that I was lying to make the snake look bad. I was avoiding the truth, but not in the way we were feeding it dead piglets. My husband's cousin owns a working ranch with a number of pigs, and my husband was purchasing them from him for a good price. I didn't want to mention it because I feared that people would start focusing on the snake's consumption of infants and demand its blood instead of offering me advice. I went to my mother's with my cat, and my husband's friend who keeps reptiles made him realize why the snake was gone. I'm back with my very happy and healthy cat, but this whole situation seriously damaged our marriage, and we're going to be receiving counseling. Hi, I'm back. The snake is still gone, but I suppose I'm returning out of desperation. People messaged me to ask how I was doing, but on the surface, therapy has been going well, and my husband has been doing everything correctly. I feel like the biggest saying this, but I don't think it's enough. Over the past few weeks, I've had to accept that something about how I view my husband has fundamentally changed, and finally, after many days of introspection, I realized what it was I have. He's been remorseful, open-minded, and treats me like a princess at all times. I can tell at home that he's making a conscious effort to listen to my opinions and thoughts and incorporate our therapist's suggestions into our lives. I no longer respect his intelligence, which is very important to me, and it's just gone. I don't know how it can return without him having a personality change. It killed my physical attraction to him. I usually have a high libido, and before all of this, we made love 4 to 5 times a week. Since everything went wrong, we've only had sex 3 times to be fair, while the snake was here. Still, it was more frequent than this. I don't think I can like the changes he's making because he's still his silly, forgetful self who needs me to pack his lunch and balance the checkbook. I can't respect that anymore, and I don't want to be his mom or a naggy sitcom wife. I used to love doing these things for him throughout our relationship. I've taken care of him, patched him up, and helped him work out his problems. I always looked for it as the ultimate expression of love, but now I'm just tired of it because he can tell something's still wrong and he's pissed off. The other day, I realized that I love him dearly as a friend. I've known him since I was 9 years old, but not as a husband, which devastates me. I can't believe I'm considering divorce after less than a year of marriage. I feel like such a failure. I haven't discussed these feelings in therapy yet because they crystallized only a few days ago, but concerning my lack of forgiveness and lack of sex drive lately when he's objectively doing all the right things, but his lack of understanding towards my apprehension makes my feelings even more pronounced. I've talked to my mom and friends about it, and they all advise me to wait longer to stick it out because I made vows, but I feel like I've discovered something fundamental about my husband that I wish I never had, and that nothing can be the same now. I guess I'm going to have to divorce my husband, and it's killing me. Update 3, October 14, 2024, 9 years later. Essentially, my ex-husband brought home a Burmese python after telling me he wanted a milk snake. I was really nervous and afraid of it, and he dismissed my concerns. I ended up shipping the snake to a reptile ranch, but it really damaged my trust in my ex because he was lying to me. I also realized that he looked to me as a second mother, and I detested that I truly tried to work through the feelings I expressed in the second update, but we split up after 3 months. It's completely acceptable if you criticize me for this because I judge myself after we split up for 6 months. He came to the funeral to support me after my grandma passed away, and since he had known her for a long time and loved her too, we went home together after the family lunch. We ended up having comfort sex, even though neither of us wanted children at the time. However, my IUD had slipped into my cervix before this, and I became pregnant. Despite our reservations about starting a family, we decided to reconcile and try again because I had always wanted to be a mother and didn't want to abort. We discovered fairly early on that it was actually a molar pregnancy, which means that instead of a normal fetus, I was carrying a tumor. I had the mole removed, but I was fortunate enough to be diagnosed with cancer from a molar pregnancy. Fortunately, the cancer was discovered when it was only at stage 2 and responded very well to chemotherapy. I have been cancer-free since 2016, but my ex's actions when I was very ill from the chemotherapy meant that we remained together after the pregnancy was lost. Caused me to put my foot down and want a divorce because he wouldn't or couldn't take care of the housework and I couldn't handle it anymore. I felt like I couldn't rely on him for anything, not even when I had cancer. In fact, I told him I was moving out and wanted a divorce just a week after I was told I was cancer-free. I lived with my mom for a year while our divorce was being finalized, and then I decided to get a job in a new city because I needed a fresh start. I also decided to fulfill a dream I'd been considering for a long time. I took a break and returned to school in 2017 to earn my BSN. I graduated in 2019 because I was enrolled in an accelerated program for individuals with prior degrees. I currently work as a neonatal nurse, which can be tough and exhausting, but it's incredible to watch sick and tiny babies grow, thrive, and eventually leave. I feel like I've found my calling. When I returned to school, I also met a guy in my class. We were friends for 2 years because I wasn't ready to date, but in 2019 we began dating. We got married in 2022, and my husband is the most amazing man and partner I could have ever asked for. I can completely rely on him, and he can rely on me. I don't even need to ask him to pick up his socks off the floor, and he even does most of the cooking, which I detest because I went into premature ovarian failure during my cancer treatment. We will begin IVF in the new year using eggs that I had frozen before my chemotherapy started, and we also want to adopt and/or foster eventually, so we have been looking into that as well. Even though my ex is doing much better since we got divorced, he tried suicide and was placed on a 72-hour hold at the hospital. He took their advice to see a psychiatrist seriously and was diagnosed with ADHD, which explains a lot about how he was when we were together. I'm sure my husband will be a wonderful support for me and an amazing father at the time of my divorce. I didn't have any confidence my ex would be either of those things. I don't talk to my ex because it's too agonizing for both of us, but my mom is still close to his mom and has updated me that he's taking medication that has really helped his ADHD, went to trade school, has a much better job now, and has been in a stable relationship. I wish him the best. When I look back at my old posts, all I can do is shake my head because I was putting up with so much that I would never put up with now. I also thought I was so mature because I was 24 and married, but obviously I still had. I'm sad for my ex too because he struggled for a long time and I was dismissing him as unhelpful, but even though he had a medical reason for his lack of consideration, I had to do what was best for me, and after his success, I was at my breaking point. Oh, and I still talk to my ex's friend the cobra breeder occasionally. Bucatini the Burmese python is still doing well in his new home TLDYR. Was no help when I became pregnant with cancer. We're both doing great after the divorce, and it was best for us both to split up. My fiancé's toxic best friend torments me, and my mental health suffers. Is our relationship doomed, or can we get better before the wedding? My fiancé has the biggest heart and would literally give you the shirt, pants, and hat off his body if you asked for it. He's a recovering people pleaser, and I understand that because I used to be a people pleaser. We've been together for more than 5 years. Began to pick up on his best friend's nasty remarks about me. I'm trying to be evasive, but let's just say that this friend reads who in the room would be most impacted by being picked on, and then he keeps picking on them until they can no longer stand it. Unfortunately, I have somehow become his favorite target. I tried to put up with these remarks, but they became very detailed, and the friend would fabricate lies about me saying things I never said. Claimed that he once called me in front of all of our friends, including my fiancé, to yell, "You're a bad friend," into the phone and then hang up. There are too many details to reveal because I'm trying to maintain my anonymity, but it began to negatively impact my mental health, and I ended up having a complete breakdown in which I told my fiancé how much this was hurting me. The first time I broke down over this, he said he would talk to his friend about teasing and playing with me less. I had a second breakdown over all of this a few weeks later. He admitted that his friend didn't actually apologize. Instead, he said he was sorry, and I was too sensitive to understand his humor. At that point, I told my fiancé that I wanted no contact with this person going forward, even if it meant missing out on things. He also said that he would be listening for any additional comments and would jump to my defense if it happened again. My fiancé kept asking if this meant he had to quit the project they're working on, and I told him I would never tell him he had to because I know how much it means to him, but in all honesty, the fact that this person is so evil that even if we tried to get through to him, we could never fully trust him to not treat me at least a little bit shitty. He agreed with me that all of this is being done with the intention of getting a rise out of me. He's not confrontational at all, and I always knew that, but it's not about confrontation, it's about standing in my corner, and I can't spend the rest of my life with someone who isn't in my corner. This friend is getting married to my best friend in a few months, and even though we are both expected to attend the wedding, it still hurts a lot that he wants to cut me off because I'm experiencing physical stress reactions. Truly don't know how I get a real knot in my stomach whenever his name is even mentioned. I've seen this friend once since everything came to a head, and he was so incredibly kind to me that it came off as arrogant. A few days later, I had my second breakdown because I realized that I might have to live my entire life on edge and wary of anyone who is even slightly around me, even if they aren't actively with me. I'm not sure how to accept that my fiancé was. This guy was supposed to be the best man at our wedding, so we haven't been talking much about it. I think that if he's still planning on having this friend at our wedding, I might have to call it off for my own sanity, which is terrible. I love my fiancé so much, and I love his big heart and the way he loves everything, but he loves some truly wretched people, and I think it will always hurt. I'm just hurting, and I want whatever happens to end so I can stop feeling so horrible and guilty all the time. I'm not sure if he'll set any boundaries with those people before the lack of boundaries becomes too much for me to handle. Comments. Comment 1. If your fiancé doesn't stand up for you, he's not just being a people pleaser, he's a doormat.